Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I've got part one of a two-part adventure where I went out and I visited some comic stores that I've been to before. And so today we're doing a return to the Outer Limits in Waltham, Mass. Now, every time I go to the Outer Limits, I come back with a giant pile of awesome stuff. They always have the goods, and it's always a different bunch of goods because they have so much stuff there. This is the kind of store where they have whole boxes of Dell. They have a whole ACG section. They have Charlton sections. They've got Golden Age. They've got everything, right? So they even have a romance section. So I dug through the boxes, and while I didn't find any romance today, I did find a bunch of other stuff. And so we're just going to jump right into this. I guess actually, real quick before I do that, link down below my new Kickstarter for my comic, The Crime Busters #7, coming soon. So you can check that out. Please hit that button, hit the notify me on launch so you don't miss it. I'm really excited for this one. Okay, having said that, let's get into the comics. They also have some 50-cent bins. I think they're 50 cents. They've always been 50 cents in the past. I didn't actually see a sign, so I forgot to ask what the price was. But whatever it was, I bought this out of it. It's Air Maiden Special #1. I might already have a copy of this. This is a comic that I think actually is a little undervalued. So it's got a cover here. The cover is by Larry Elmore. Now, Larry Elmore, of course, is famous for doing a lot of book covers, a lot of fantasy stuff, a lot of dragons, Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of fantasy books, fantasy magazine covers. And some of those fantasy magazines and stuff with Elmore covers can go for quite a bit. So it's interesting. His comic work really hasn't taken off, but it's a really cool sort of good girl art cover, I guess you might say, featuring Valkyrie and the Air Maidens. Again, I think I have this already, but for 50 cents or whatever, couldn't pass it up. It's just a really cool cover. Now you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of the stuff they have at this comic store. Now they have all the regular stuff too, all of the superhero stuff, but they have this stuff that you can't really find other places, and so you'll see that here. A couple of Spire comics that I'm missing. I'm past halfway to my complete run of Spire comics, and here is My Brother's Keeper. That's not the only one I got, because I also got this one. And this is a kiddies Christian comic. It's interesting they're making a distinction. This is for kids as opposed to the other ones, which are also clearly for kids. I don't really understand. I guess it's for little kids. But this one is Noah's Ark. So that's two more Spire books off of my checklist. One checklist that I haven't put together, but at this point I think I should, because I do have quite a bit of stuff at this point from this publisher. They didn't publish very much, so I think, I might already have this, but for $5 I had to pick it up. It's Jungle Adventures #1. $5 Skywald for me, that's a bargain. They're all to these 25-cent giant books. They only printed a few things. I already have at least one other issue of Jungle Adventures, but I don't have a checklist for them. So that's something I should really do, is sign up for this, because they're just always cool to see the Skywalds in the wild. And again, for $5, I had to get it. Now here's something that is normally outside of my collecting purview, but as I was going through all the different boxes from different publishers, they had a whole long box of underground comics. Now, a lot of them were like true underground comics with an X, from the 70s, the kind of stuff you would get in a head shop. A lot of like R. Crumb stuff and Young Lust and sort of more adult titles. A lot of them having sort of like, hippie counterculture, stoner humor stuff. For the most part, other than Young Lust or whatever, I'm not really interested in those books. However, they had a couple things that I was interested in. So let me start with the ones that I would say aren't quite, for me, really underground comics. What they are is a real precursor to the independent comics movement, because this is an anthology with top comic creators of the day stepping out from their normal Marvel and DC jobs to do totally awesome uh, books in this indie anthology where they keep the rights, right? So this is creator owned stuff, but it's coming out in the mid 70s. So if this had been coming out even 6 years later, it would have been the kind of thing that we would be seeing published by First Comics or Eclipse Comics or whatever. But because it's in the 70s, here we are. It's Star Reach. Here's issue 1. Howard Chaykin's Cody Starbuck. And he would later do a different version of this character in Marvel called Dominic Fortune. But here is the first issue of Star Reach and the first Cody Starbuck. Warning, this next one has a little bit of nudity on the cover. I don't normally show nudity stuff, but this is actually where I really started digging into this box because it's Star Reach number 3. This has a story by a fantasy story by Frank Brunner called Dragonus the Last Barbarian. Now, of course, Frank Brunner, fantastic art, fantastic artist, and famous for doing his Doctor Strange run. But here he is doing this, and this is a wraparound cover. So there's the back cover. So just totally awesome. Once I saw that, I was like, what else do we have in this box? What we have is some more Star Reach. Here's issue 5. This has Gideon Faust, Warlock at Large. This is by Len Wein and Howard Chaykin, listed as Howie Chaykin. So this is very early on in his career. Again, another wraparound cover. But it's really cool. The more comics I make, the more interested I get in independent comics. And you think, of course, when you think independent comics, you think the big indie boom of the 80s. But again, this for me is not really underground. This is independent comics. It's just taking place in the mid 70s. But all these great creators. Here's issue 6. And this has a cover. I think it's by Jeffrey Catherine Jones. This issue promises a new story by Ray Bradbury. So this is like top stuff here. It's Michael Moorcock's Elric. This is issue 6. Check out that great cover here. The back cover is the same image, but without the trade dress. This painting of Elric. That's Star Reach number 6. And finally, we got Star Reach number 8. Parzival, Part 1, His Journey, by P. Craig Russell and Patrick C. Mason. P. Craig Russell, incredible artist. This is dated 1977. Now, I already have Part 2 of this. I don't remember if it's issue 9 or if it's in issue 10. It's the only issue of Star Reach I had before this batch. But, and that one I paid more for. So you see here, $4.75. These were all $4.75 each, except for the Frank Brunner one was $5.75. So basically, the average price of these was just under $5 each. So at that price, I had to get them. They actually had some more issues of Star Reach. I think they had 11 and 12 and another one up in the 9, 10, 11, 12. They had like 3 of those that I didn't have. But they were twice as much. They were $10 each. And since this is a little bit out of my normal collecting, I decided not to get those. But these aren't books you see around that much. Not to say they're particularly rare or they're certainly not particularly valuable, but they're filled with incredible art and stories. And you just don't see them around very much. So I was really excited to get all of those. I can't wait to sort of dig into those because, again, it's really great to see this sort of precursor. Along those same lines, they also had several issues of Hot Stuff, which is a similar book coming out at the same time. Star Reach, I think, is maybe more specific fantasy and science fiction. I'm not sure about Hot Stuff, but they had a couple issues of that. While I was digging through that bin, they had a number of issues of Young Lust, which I was very tempted to get, but they were $10 each, and I just wasn't in a place where I was ready to spend that. These, however, are $8.75 each, and I had to get them. It's Women's Comics. Here we are, Women's Comics number 5. This has this great cover where the bad guy is taking these women and zapping with a ray and turning them all into Playboy bunnies. But the heroine is bashing through the door and stopping him. I love the art, the colors, and everything. So this is, again, mid-70s. This, to me, is more of a true underground comic. And, of course, with Women's Comics, all the comics in here are done by women. So that's issue 5. You may remember a couple of years ago I found issue 7 of this at a different store for $5. Again, these were $8.75. I think it's still perfectly reasonable. This was a great cover that I had to get. It's Women's Comics number 6, the special bicentennial issue. And we've got basically George Washington is giving the flag to Betsy Ross and saying, "Can you have it ready by next week?" And she's looking really ticked off because she's all dressed up in uniform with a gun. And it says Betsy Ross had been planning to lead the troops up Bunker Hill. So really great sort of slice of the period, almost 50 years ago now, the bicentennial issue. Great back cover too, with this sort of World War II era sort of propaganda poster art. Just so cool. So really happy to get those. I'm finding my collecting is slowly shifting. I've had these major shifts in my collection a few times. I started getting into romance in the late aughts, and then the early teens is when I discovered Archie and really got heavy into Archie. And now that I'm making comics, I find myself being drawn more and more to the indie books from the 70s and 80s. So I feel myself shifting again in collecting. But speaking of Archie, so here's my last purchases, but I was excited to get these because these are books off of my checklist. And it's always exciting when I can get books off of my checklist. We'll start with Archie number 151. It's in pretty decent shape. A nice mid-grade here. Archie 151. Archie is actually my longest run. Now, I think of my longest run as being Avengers because I have issues 1 to 503. But I actually have a longer run of Archie because I have issues 155 through 714. So I have something like whatever that is, 565 issues in a row or something like that of Archie. And I'll never be able to finish Archie unless I win the lottery because the early issues are just prohibitively expensive. So I'm treating issue 50 as my first issue because that's such a big key, and it's also a nice round number. And so my goal is to get issue 50 and up. I do have a few issues before 50, but that's sort of where I'm like, I want to get 50 and up, and then if I happen to get things before that fall into my lap, then I'll pick them up. So, I'm not really close to that. I would say from between issues 50 and 155, obviously there's about a 100 issue gap there. I probably only have about 30 of those, 35, so I'm a long way off. But I love getting books from this era. Next video, I'm going to show another comic store I went to, and I got an Archie from a little bit earlier. So this is a relatively early-ish 12-cent issue, but the real magic for me in Archie's is the 10 centers. And speaking of that, a little bit earlier, 10 centers. It's Archie's Pal Jughead number 55. It's pretty rough, but I'm not a stickler. And Archie's Pal Jughead number 57. Now that last one was dated September 1959. I know that because when they every January they put the year on the cover. So here's issue 57, cover dated January 1960, meaning it still would have been printed in the late 50s, probably right at the end of 59. Interesting, Jughead at this point is still bi-monthly. But cool cover, and that's 2 more Jugheads off my list. I have issues 84 and up from Jughead, so it's 84 to 352. Volume 2, 1 to 214. And then Volume 3, I forget how many issues it ran, but it was only like 16. So my run on that is almost as long as my Archie run, but not quite. It's a little bit shorter. and I'm basically stuck because issue 78, I think it is, either 78 or 79, I always forget, has the Creature of the Black Lagoon on it, and people, it goes for hundreds of dollars, and I couldn't give less of a crap about that. So that's sort of always going to be a sticking point for me unless I manage to somehow luck into it at a flea market or trade for it or something like that. But this was an awesome haul. You can see all this cool stuff you just don't see every day. 1950s Archie books, women's comics, underground stuff from the 70s, the Star Reach books, the Spire, the Skywald. So much cool stuff off the beaten path you don't normally find, all in one place, the outer limits of Waltham. So, again, if you're in the area, that is one of my top stores in Massachusetts that I've been to, and I've been to most of them at this point. That's one of the top ones to go to. I always find stuff there. So let me know what you think down below. I'll see you next time.